This is talk show host Charles Goyette from KFNX with another special feature from my Phoenix radio show for Antiwar.com.
Well, I would love to have been a fly on the wall in the White House press room when Russell Mokhiber asked a couple of his questions. Russell is the editor of an advocacy newsletter, Corporate Crime Reporter. How they ever let him have White House press credentials, I don't know, but they did, and there he was, and he's been in the Bush White House in the press room asking inconvenient questions. Russell joins us by telephone from Washington, D.C. this morning. Russell, good morning, sir.
Good morning, Charles. Two quick corrections.
Yeah.
One, McClellan calls Corporate Crime Reporter an advocacy journal. Actually, in fact, it's a straight news journal. We charge $800 a year. It goes to lawyers, and we report on white-collar and corporate crime. I consider myself an advocacy journalist, but the journal itself, Corporate Crime Reporter, is straight corporate crime news.
Well, Institute for Public Accuracy calls it an advocacy newsletter.
No, they're quoting McClellan.
Oh, they're quoting McClellan. Good.
And the second thing is, I don't have White House press credentials, and this has been a huge thing. They won't give me White House press credentials. I have congressional press credentials, and every time I go there, I have to be cleared in. And there's this cat and mouse game where the press conference is starting, it's proceeding, I'm being held at the White House gate, and my guess is it has less to do with security and more to do with the kinds of questions I ask.
Of course. How is it that Jeff Gannon, after all, can get White House press credentials, and Maureen Dowd maybe can't, or you can't?
Well, that's one way to put it. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, this is one that, in fact, people can find, I think, on commondreams.org, some of the questions that you posed to Scott McClellan during his tenure, and I like this one. Let me just read it for our listeners. The L.A. Times reported Wednesday that the Pentagon deliberately misled CNN about the invasion of Fallujah. Specifically, you go on to detail, on October 14th, the Pentagon spokesman told CNN, troops crossed the line of departure. It's going to be a long night. In fact, the invasion of Fallujah didn't start for another 3 weeks. The Times said this was part of an elaborate psychological operation to dupe insurgents. So 2 questions you posed to Scott McClellan on this. One, does the president believe that the U.S. should deliberately mislead reporters to gain an advantage over the enemy? And 2, have you ever deliberately misled reporters to gain advantage over the enemy? And what did Scott tell you?
Well, I think he denied it, but now he's admitting it.
Right.
And, one of the things he says in his book is that I held the administration in low regard. Well, who doesn't? And second, he now holds the administration in low regard. I hold this whole city in low regard. I hold the Democrats and the Republicans in low regard, and I hold him in low regard for weaseling out and not speaking out when it could have made a difference and saved a lot of lives. And instead, he's, better late than never, but instead, to promote a book and to gain some attention, he does it after he leaves when it's not going to make a difference. The second thing is, he says that the Iraq War was a blunder. I believe a blunder is a mistake. It wasn't a blunder. It was an intentional act. And there are people like Vincent Bugliosi, the guy who prosecuted Charlie Manson, who thinks that Bush and his cadre and those who took us to this illegal war should be prosecuted for homicide. And I agree with him. And Bugliosi's got a book out. I hope you get a chance to interview him.
We had him last week, in fact. Beach and punch on it. Yeah.
And there's going to be a growing movement to tap George Bush on the shoulder after he leaves office and say, why don't you come over here and speak with a grand jury? Because on a lie, Bush took this country to war. There was no imminent threat from Iraq. And as a result, 4,000 young Americans are now dead. Now, Bush, when he was governor of Texas, executed 152 capital offenders, and those people, for the most part, killed 1, maybe 2 people. We're talking about 4,000 dead here, and he knew going in that Americans would die.
Well, I would like to see him frog marched out of the White House as well to answer these questions. I think, and I suggested to Bugliosi that he's his defense is it's self-evident. He has demonstrated his cluelessness over the course of almost 8 years in national public life. And so it falls under the category. It's not to say that there weren't people that knew that they were lying to the American people, but Bush has a pretty believable defense when he says he didn't know better.
I can't buy it.
Why?
Because the national intelligence, as many people have pointed out, the national intelligence estimate, which he had in his hands, which is the judgment of 16 intelligence agencies, including the CIA, before the war started, told him very clearly that Iraq posed no imminent threat to the United States.
Yeah, but Russell,
he took this country to war.
He went to Israel just a month ago, or a couple of months ago, and he said, "No, I don't believe that new national intelligence estimate about Iran. It's just opinions." He undermined the credibility of his own country in a foreign land. That was the sort of thing early during the course of this war, which his Kool-Aid drinkers and supporters used to soundly beat critics for.
Well, here's the thing. He's the guy who set up the table and put the chair behind the Kool-Aid stand. He's the guy who's responsible. The buck stops at the Kool-Aid stand. And he's the guy who's going to be held responsible. I think there should be a national movement to hold. Forget about. The presidential politics is totally ridiculous. Nobody's talking about. I was reading Chris Hedges. He gave a talk to Furman University, and he quoted St. Augustine as saying that hope has two beautiful daughters, anger and courage. And the American people have to get angry and they have to get courageous, or we're going to lose our country.
Yeah. Well, they had an opportunity to do so ever since the Downing Street memos, and they haven't done it yet.
That doesn't mean we can't keep trying, and we have to keep trying.
Yeah. I suppose we haven't keep trying. Well, is it your contention then? I guess I'm a little more generous in my assessment of McClellan, but you know him and I don't. But I concluded from this thing that he has had a real epiphany. He has had a little time and distance to separate himself from, being paid to be his master's voice and to say, okay, now what was I doing this whole time? What did I see in Washington? I
sensed from him. Again, my view is better late than never, although it's the easy way out.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to speak out, it's the easy way out. If you're going to speak out and make a difference, you do it when you can make a difference. And he obviously could have made a difference much earlier. But given that, better late than never. I sensed early on that he wasn't believing what he was saying.
Did you?
For example, and again, all these questions are posted on commondreams.org, bottom right column under Scotty and me. And in November of 2004, I asked him about Major General Smedley Butler. Major General Smedley Butler was the most decorated Marine Corps general in the century. And then he, like McClellan, had an epiphany when he got out. And in 1935, he wrote a book called War is a Racket, in which he writes, and I read this to McClellan. Can you imagine? I was talking about a fish out of water. Here are all these mainstream journalists and, saying, hey, how many did we kill over there, and what's this, and what's the body count, and blah, 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 and blah, blah. Not asking about the body count, but asking about basic, regular news of the day kinds of questions. And I said, well, have you ever heard of Smedley Butler? And he wrote this book called War is a Racket, where he said, I was a high-class muscle man for big business, for Wall Street, and for the bankers. In short, I was a racketeer, a gangster for capitalism. And this guy was the most decorated Marine Corps general in the history of the Marine Corps. 2
Congressional Medals of Honor.
And so I asked him about this guy. And, and sometimes I would ask these questions, he would say, next question. He would just blow me off.
Right.
But in this one, he said something interesting. He said, I would say that we should always view war as a last resort. And that's what this president does. We should always make sure that it is a last resort. It is something that the president goes into making a decision. It's not something the president goes into making a decision lightly.